So it was just really profound, that level of connection, because I had never experienced that, because grief was so isolating and so hidden. It's so hidden from like the public. You don't kind of go out and go, I'm grieving, like it doesn't really happen. But it was when it kept happening after I shared, I'd perform and then I'd get people telling me their personal stories. I thought, wow, this there is something in this.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Today, I am chatting with Gabriela Georges. She is a writer, a musician, and a grief guide, as well as the founder of the Grief Cocoon. Today, we'll be talking about her own grief journey after the passing of her mother and how it is that she evolved to now help other people in their own grief experience. Welcome, Gabriela.
Thank you, Kendra.
We had technical difficulties logging on, yet
Mm,
we persevered and we did it. We
yes.
waited. And sometimes in life, it takes that. It takes a little time and patience, and things all of a sudden just flow. And you, as a writer and as a musician, that probably happens with like writer's block and things like that. Yes?
Yeah, it's all about the process and having a bit of patience,
And then what are some
continuing
of
to
the
work.
And continuing to what are some of those things that as a writer that you're all of a sudden like that can help you unblock? Is there something that just works for you that every time you do XYZ, all of a sudden things just start flowing?
Well, actually, I think just being okay with not coming up with your best work. As soon as you start writing or creating something. So I think I've now become less judgmental of myself and just sort of just go with the flow and see what comes out. Sometimes it might be good, sometimes it isn't, and that's all part of the process. So I don't really face writer's block, I think, as much now, because it's just kind of, I'm not aiming for perfectionism. I think that
Mm.
writer's block happens when you really want it to be amazing from the very beginning, and it doesn't really often work that way. So I think just getting words down on a page, and then from there, the more you get into the flow, things will hopefully get a little bit better, and then they might go in a different direction, and that's fine too. So I think just letting it be maybe a bit crap for a while until you get to the
Mhm.
good stuff.
That's so good. It's like just letting it, yeah, flow. And then afterwards, then you can observe and look at
Mhm.
it. And sometimes when you're removed from a situation, then you can see it without as much judgment too, right? Too.
Yes, I was going to
Yeah.
say, yeah, taking a break from what you're doing as well can help, like if you are sort of getting to a point where it's a bit of a sticking point, just go and make some tea or go for a walk or do something else and then come back to it, and you might see it in a different way.
Well, thank you for starting and be with this part as I'm just like improvising because that's what this conversation is about. Is just kind of going
Mm,
with the flow. As I say, I don't send any questions beforehand, so we just kind of see where it takes us. So
mm.
thanks for going along with that with us here and sharing a little more about your writing process. Now, tell us about you. People are hearing the accent, and we did have to schedule do some time. Like, by the way, talk about commitment, people. Gabriela was willing to wake up. She booked this podcast at a time in which it was 3 a.m. for her Australia time.
That is true.
And then as I was sending the RSVP, I was like, "Wait a minute. It's like 11 a.m. for me, but 3 a.m. For her?" I'm like, "Gabriela, I am okay with recording in the evening if you would refer."
Yeah, I was a little bit too ambitious there, but I would have made
I
it
love
work.
it. I love it. Okay, so you're in Australia. Tell us
Mhm.
about your upbringing and more about you.
Well, I would say I'm maybe one of the defining things is I'm the youngest of 4 sisters. And I come from a Middle Eastern family. I was born in Australia, in Melbourne. My parents were migrants. They came over in the mid 70s. And so I guess I'm kind of a, what they call like a, is it a third culture kid or part of the diaspora? And I always sort of navigate the, more than one culture because I grew up with my family sort of with the Middle Eastern values and really, really tight knit family. And then I grew up in Western society, which is has different priorities and different values, and so I had to sort of navigate that. And along the way, yeah, so I had my mom and dad here, and I was really close with my mom. I was the youngest of 4, and my sisters were a lot older than me. They moved out, and so it was just me mainly with my mom and dad at home. And that's sort of my background as a young person. And I spent a lot of time alone, so that's why I got into writing and playing guitar and singing, all of those things I could do by myself, basically. So that's why I'm a big creative. I love just even drawing. I'm that really has helped give me confidence as well performing at school and all of those things. And yeah, but how I ended up coming to doing grief work is through the loss of my mom when I was 20, the unexpected loss. So she'd been pretty healthy. She was very health conscious, actually. She was very active. She was working with my dad full time. They used to run businesses like stores that I used to help out at. And yeah, she just was feeling unwell, and she got diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer, and it was quite hard to find through like the different things that the doctors did. And so by the time they found that it was called duodenal cancer, it's like in between. I think it's in the small intestine or something, but yeah, she was already kind of in the later stages of cancer when they actually finally found it. And so yeah, it was only like it was over the span of 3 to 4 months that she just got more and more unwell. Yeah, just slowly deteriorated. And yeah, I was 20 at the time, and it was like a few months before my 21st birthday. That was, I guess, we'd never in my family experienced a significant loss like that. We
Mhm,
just I just didn't even think it was a possibility. I think I was quite sheltered, and
mhm.
I thought, I had it pretty good. And I thought, my mom, mom's invincible. Like she'll be fine. She'll get through it, and she's strong, and she can do anything. And yeah, I just at that point realized like, oh, she's also just a human as well. And she's not invincible. And so
Mm.
yeah, that was, and like I think people in Australia, like you can, 18 is a big kind of birthday, but then the 21st, is like the next big thing. And people usually look forward to it, but I definitely didn't. I was just crying at every crying the whole
Mm.
time. It was, yeah, a pretty emotional year. And well, the next few years were quite like just hard, and I was a bit lost and a bit down, and I just didn't know how to deal with it because I had no skills and no coping
Well, yeah,
mechanisms.
you're 20. You're 20,
Mm,
you're the baby of the house.
mhm.
You were in college at that time? Do you
I
call it college,
was,
university? How do you call
yeah,
when
we
after
say
high school?
university. Yep. Yeah.
University. Were you at university at that time? Was it in Melbourne as well, or was it
Mm.
outside of Melbourne?
It was in Melbourne, and I was studying. I think I was in my, yeah, I was studying psychology. I was about to graduate, And so, yeah, that was
So
my
your focus was very different to you're here, you're at school, your mom
mm,
passes, you're still having to jump back into going to school.
exams.
You yeah, and you're 21, you've never experienced this before. You probably
Mm.
yeah, like what do I do? So do you feel you escaped a little bit from the emotions at some point and then just focused on school? Is that what you did?
I think I really became numb to the whole
Mhm.
thing. You know, I didn't really process it at all. I just sort of was still going through life and doing what I needed to do, but I wasn't really kind of engaging much with my emotions or with what was around me. It was sort of I was in a bit of a bubble, and so I still went to work and studied and everything, but it was kind of like I was just not really there, I would say.
Yeah, going through the motions. You were kinda just
Mm,
going through the
mhm.
motions, not really yeah, okay.
Yeah.
At what point then, yeah, did you start? Because you were studying psychology,
Mm.
right, at that moment, then which is you're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
interesting."
Yeah. Yep.
Tell me that process of what point did you how many years later or time later did you realize, "Wait, there's something I have yet not tapped in my emotions?"
Mm. Well, I thought, you know, I was a singer. Well, I'm still a singer, but I used to use singing and writing as just a form of expression. And I stopped singing for a while, but I kept on writing, and I thought I had stopped. But looking back on my diaries years later, I realized I was writing during the time she was unwell. I was writing soon after, she actually took her last breath, and so I was still expressing myself, but in a very like primitive form because I couldn't quite make sense of what was going on and I couldn't articulate myself very well, but I still put words down on the page. And it wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years later that I actually started putting my experiences and emotions into poetry form. I think before that it was just like just basically very raw kind of like I miss my mom, or I couldn't really write much more than the very like a child writing basically, because it was just so raw and what I was going through was so foreign to me. But after about 4 years I started to realize like, oh, I wrote a couple of like a few songs and poems, and I thought I think I'm ready to actually share this with someone. And so that's when I started going out and actually reading my poetry out and performing my songs. And I started connecting with people through that and realized, oh, I'm not the only one that is going through this or that has gone through this. There's other people that have lost loved ones, that are grieving. They can relate to what I'm sharing. And that was sort of it clicked for me. Then I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I thought I was just talking about my experience, but actually this is not I'm not the only one. And so that's when I started to really lean into that and continuing to connect with people through my own work, and then eventually through events and through workshops.
The arts are something that they're so powerful. They're such powerful tools because they connect at most let me just most or
Mm,
most art expressions or most end up connecting a lot of times with just our soul and with because
mm,
and you're right, like when you hear something you feel at times as if it's been written for you or
mm,
when you or I've recently, when I watch American Idol and they're like they tell their story and then they start singing a song, let's say by Adele and I'll or whoever, and they sing it and because they've just shared their story, it feels as if it's an original song that they've just wrote because it sounds exactly with what the story it is that they had just shared and
mm,
it just relates so much. So when you started then writing out your songs or your poems and then connecting and realizing that you were really sharing the emotions of others. What was that like, "Oh, aha,"
Mm.
moment? Where was it that you're like, "How can I turn this into something else?"
Yeah, it was just when it kept happening every time I shared my work. And because I thought, maybe one time, like the first time, I thought, oh yeah, cool, one or two people, had some story, they started actually what ended up happening, what used to happen was like I would share my work and then they would come up to me, but not only just sort of tell me that they related to what I was saying, but then they would start telling me their story, just total strangers. And I thought, wow, like I don't even know the name of this person. And they're telling me about recently, they'd lost their grandparent or their grandma, or that they have been going through the same thing, and they're grieving. And so it was just really profound, that level of connection, because I had never experienced that, because grief was so isolating and so hidden. It's so hidden from like the public. You don't kind of go out and go, I'm grieving, like it doesn't really happen. But it was when it kept happening after I shared, I'd perform and then I'd get people telling me their personal stories. I thought, wow, this there is something in this, and maybe I can find a way to bring us together, bring all of us who are grieving and who've lost loved ones, who are struggling. Like we can come together and actually talk and have open conversations and share our, if they do, they write their own poetry or songs. It started off as like a bit of an open platform for people who express their grief through creativity. So that's how it started. But I was just, I needed to kind of have it happen a few times where people would just start telling me their personal stories. And I felt so honored to hear them, but it was also a shock that, oh my goodness, like it feels like this person feels like they actually, just because I shared my story, suddenly they're given permission to share their
Mhm.
story. So it was a pretty profound connection with strangers that I'd never met.
Mm. And
Mm.
so these started like were they open mics like at coffee shops at what kind of venues did you use first off to start having these, or did you rent a space and then create a meetup? Like how did people hear about the Grief Cocoon and start attending?
Yeah, it started in my local, close to home, like my local area. I used to rent out these rehearsal spaces actually that were quite used to be used, well, they'd be used for band rehearsals, but they're quite like a carpeted nice empty space. And I would bring in like my mom's scarves. I'd bring in sort of things to decorate the space, candles or photos or
Mm.
different things. And I would kind of curate the space and play music and then have like afternoon tea. It normally, it started on like a Sunday afternoon basically. And so it would be like a, yeah, afternoon tea type of time, like at 3 p.m. or something. But it would start with people sharing their work. We'd have a break and then have a chat, have some cake, have some tea, and then come back in and continue and hear, listen to other people share their stories and their work and their experiences. And so it was pretty basic, like, but it was more, I would bring in my mom's scarves and a friend of mine would help me set it up and decorate it. And so it was sort of, I definitely brought my mum in with me, to every
Mhm.
event. And I would tell people, like, these scarves in the room, like hanging from the ceiling, these are my mom's.
Mm.
So yeah, it was
That's
more
so
just like
nice.
a quiet space that we would have some sunlight coming in, and I was able to sort of make it what I wanted it to be for people. Yeah.
And how did they find out about it? Like how
Ah,
did you advertise?
I just created flyers. I took them to like local community centers. I shared it online through social media, through word of mouth, through email, just all the usual kind of ways that people find
Yeah.
out.
'Cause this
Yeah.
was 2014 approximately that you started
Yeah,
doing that?
2014, 15, 16. Yeah.
R Around
Yeah.
that time. So, you basically yeah, you created what you wanted to see and what you would have
Mm,
needed even 4 years prior,
yeah.
but you didn't see. You didn't even know that there could be something like that. So you created what you were looking for, and you created a community which was needed, something you needed in your grief. Okay, so what has the grief cocoon evolved to now? Now it's 10 years later. What is it now?
So now it's still a community. It's still community based, but there's workshops, creative workshops. So it's not just I still occasionally run open mics, but it's I realize that there might be people that want to try and express their grief creatively, but they might not already have the tools to do that. So I wanted to sort of start working with people around like, okay, if you're interested in writing or you're interested in sound, or we even did like animation an animation workshop one time, which was really cool. But so it was more about sharing tools and helping people who maybe had never really didn't see themselves as creatives, but they wanted to find different ways to express their grief and to connect with others. So it became workshops, creative workshops. We have a podcast. It's a lot of social media content and education, and also we have an app where people can actually, it's a space where their grief is welcome. They can find resources and education. They can connect with others who have experienced similar losses. And so and I'm still building. There's always more that I want to kind of create more resources, and there's a lot more online support now, whereas before it was very, and there is value as well in local face to face kind of contact. But also I realized like, oh, grief is a universal experience. Like there's people all over the world that are struggling with grief and that want support. And so it doesn't have to be Melbourne based or Australia based, but it could be for people all over. So
This is
yeah.
wonderful. So yeah, so now everybody can have access to the grief cocoon in some shape or form.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, so beautiful. Now, have you or what have you noticed in terms of creativity
Mm.
when you've experienced grief? How did grief shift or change the way that you create?
Oh, how did grief shift the way I create?
Like so you were 20. So would you
Mm.
remember basically I know you were young too, but I know that a lot of love
Mm.
songs are either heartbreak or all which is grief. Heartbreak is grief, right? A lot of these songs are
Yeah.
of heartbreak and that they just come out, right, as a way of
Mm.
expressing. Do you feel that grief opens up like a portal to some extent of these other things that come up? That's my question. That's my really redundant question.
Well, actually, I would say grief opened me up. And so the work that I then created from that point on was very personal and very real and very honest, because I guess probably didn't have the energy to make stuff up because I had so much I needed to express just because of like what I was experiencing, that the creativity, the work that came out was just a lot more authentic, and it was just more real, I would say. So then that could more directly connect with others, I think, because they could hear the honesty in my work. And so I've realized over the years, like one of the things that tends to happen when I share my poems or my songs is that people cry. And I used to think, oh my gosh, oh no, I'm making people cry. But I realized that, oh, it's because something is touching them, like in my work, and maybe yeah, it's brought something up for them, and it's crying is a good thing. It's a release, like they're able to, I guess, have an emotional release when they hear my words or when they hear my music. So it actually made me create deeper work. It made me get deeper with what I create. So it's not just, you know, made up mushy love songs or which, you know, there's room for that too. But it wasn't as superficial anymore, when compared to, yeah, when I was younger. I'd been writing since I was like uh, 10 or 12. So, and you know, I had no life experience. It was just very corny and very mushy. And so now, after like having experiencing a significant loss, you know, the work that I created was a lot more, um, yeah, just a lot more personal and real. And I think I'd never really gotten that deep with my work. So I think grief was the avenue for that. Like it was the outlet for full a deeper expression of myself and my emotions, and so it was more deeply, I guess, deeply human, that more people could connect with it, because I was talking about grief, and I was talking about my mom, and I was talking about things that a lot of people do experience, even though they might will have lost someone different, or they might experience heartbreak or a different kind of loss. But the grief itself and the pain and the it wasn't just the pain, it was like honoring, you know, like honoring my mom and honoring uh, the relationships, like different, yeah. I've written about different kinds of losses, but yeah, I think I would say that it just opened up the avenue for me to create a lot more work that was more deep and more authentic.
Yeah, like I have this perception, at least of having experienced grief myself, of things becoming like my senses becoming more intense and like in the
Mm.
intensifying of my senses. And so that's why I was wondering, like, if in the creative component, if that also had been something that you had noticed in that.
Mm.
The the journey then that you've taken then a journey in life, journey in grief, has led you now to also then be a grief a guide as well for others. Talk about that part. And as we're talking now here in the date that we're recording, you mentioned you're also traveling something and doing something completely out of your comfort zone. You're kind of just something that you feel would
Mm.
have not occurred had you not experienced grief. So share about those two things, your experience as a grief guide and now this journey that you're on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I realized, I guess, at some point after some time of working with people and starting to host events, and I think I realized, oh, a lot of people need support, and I may have something to offer. And because I, compared to maybe others, I might have had more years of dealing with grief, because I lost my mom when I was 20, and so I thought, yeah, I think I this seems to be a natural thing that I do. Just being comfortable with talking about grief, being open to people sharing their losses with me and their experiences, and me being able to hold that space like for them, and to be able to sit with them in that grief, and to maybe hold some hope as well for people, and to share any insights that I've learned as well. So I think grief guidance is sort of just saying that, you know, I kind of I'm not in your shoes, but I've been in my shoes, and I've dealt with my own sort of grief, and I'm still going on that journey, and I might, you know, be able to support you along the way. And so it's kind of being a companion to other people, and to yeah, just be able to sit with them, and to share, or to show them possibilities, basically, for how they can live with the grief, live alongside it, and how it can, I guess, even kind of be part of their life in a way that's not always just about the pain and the loss, but also about the transformation and the the changes that happen, and the focus on like what matters in life, and you're able to sort of let go of a lot of things that you thought were important, because grief, as I was talking to someone this morning, like grief kind of really strips away all the stuff that you thought was worth worrying about, and you realize like, oh, there's not actually a lot in life that is really really important, that is
Yeah, it puts things
worth.
into perspective. Yeah, it
Yeah,
really puts life
exactly.
in perspective. Mhm.
Yeah, it puts things into perspective. And so through my journey with grief, I've really, I think, come to appreciate life more, basically. And so this year I decided to, well, I decided last year, but it's happening this year. I've decided to travel, to road trip up the east coast of Australia on my own, and to just explore new places, to go to warmer places than Melbourne. It's not the best. It doesn't have the best weather, and so I realized like, oh, I'm doing this because, I mean, it's going to be fun, but also because I realize life is not forever, and I could wait for the perfect time, but it never happens. And so I thought, well, why can't I just do it now? And I don't want to die with regrets. And I think that's one thing you realize, like a lot of, the research says that there are these top 5 regrets that people
Mhm.
who are dying, talk about. And a lot of it, in some of it, is about not living the life that's authentic to them. And so I thought, well, I don't want to be that person. I want to actually live life now as much as I can. And so that if anything does happen, if I don't get the chance to grow old, at least I will be content with what I've done now. And so yeah, I just thought, this is the year I'm going to travel and explore places, and just give myself that, make that dream come true, because I don't know what will happen next year, the year after. And so I'm still working along the way. I'm still kind of continuing to do grief work, and to run workshops, which is what I love. But also I can explore places. I love nature, and so nature has been like a big support for me. And I think going to places where there's different landscapes and different hikes is just very therapeutic. So yeah.
That's perfect. How long do you plan this trip to be? How long do you stay in each place that you arrive?
It really differs. So I've only started in the 2nd of March. So this is the first month of my trip, and I'll be traveling for 5 months, and then coming back to Melbourne in August for a project that I have. And then I'm not sure if I feel like I won't be done. I feel like I won't be done with traveling, but I'll see how I go until then. But at least 5 months, in this the beginning of the journey, and then coming back to Melbourne, and then it's like a bit of a reset. I can decide whether I want to continue exploring places or to stay in Melbourne.
Or which city you fell in love with
Yeah,
in your during your trip and that you get go back to call home. You never know.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
never know where it would take you.
Hmm.
So, let's talk about the other losses. You've had other losses in your life that different types. Your grandparents passed away. You've
Hmm.
had breakups, different types of different types of losses. How do you feel that the tools you gathered or have learned to use along the way in your grief journey with your
Hmm.
mom have now played a part in the other grief experiences you've had?
Yeah, I really feel like I have a lot of options now in my tool belt to sort of draw on when I am going through a loss, whether it is a relationship breakup, or whether it's global crises that are happening, the environment, whether it's my, yeah, I have lost all my grandparents now, and I'm really intentional about processing the grief. I kind of basically just choose the different types of kind of tools that I have and actually put them into practice, whether it is sometimes it's movement, like I might go for a walk, or I might kind of I did recently some grief movement training, which is really great, like a bit of it kind of incorporates yoga and breathing and sound. And so I have that as an extra tool now. I can draw on movement. I can cook. Sometimes it's just cooking and crying, or sometimes it's listening to music. But I know that when I do face a new loss, it's kind of like, okay, I have been here before. I kind of understand the process that I need to give myself time to grieve first before kind of just jumping to something else. So I'm intentional about taking time to do that, and I use the different sort of things that I've learned along the way. It could be journaling, which I still do. So now it I still obviously deal with the grief, but it's sort of, I know what to do when it comes up.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gabriela, you mentioned your mom's scarves when you would started the Grief Cocoon and that you would put them there and kind of bring her along with
Mm.
you in this space. How do you bring your mom along in your everyday, and how is it that you've continued that connection and relationship with her? What are some
Mm.
of those ways?
Yeah. So over the years, I still actually have her scarves, and I still, just yesterday, was wearing her shirt, a yellow shirt that she had. And so it was always I think the easiest way to kind of connect with her is through the, her items, her jewelry or her clothes and scarves. But actually, over the years, more recent years, I've realized that, the biggest way I carry her with me is through the way I am with people. Like, she was a very generous person. She was a very kind person. She wasn't judgmental. And so my I intend to be more of that, like to be kind to people, to not judge people, to sort of give, share what I have, and to actually uh, embody some of those values that she shared and that she had. So really, I realized that if I didn't have any of her stuff anymore, I could still, I still carry her with me internally and through my interactions with people. And that is the biggest, I think that's even more significant to me now, because it's not just about the stuff, the physical things, but it's more about actually acknowledging that she's part of me, and that I'm part of her through our shared values and the way that we are in the world. So yeah.
And the legacy continues that
Mm,
way more than it would with an item. The legacy continues of the
mm,
lives you've touched that you would have not otherwise influenced had you not experienced
mm,
the grief of your mom and the person that you are. How are ways that you and your sisters and your dad incorporate her into your lives in, like, when you have gatherings, or how is that dynamic now? Because I know, like, when somebody having, again,
mm.
out of shared experience, I know it happened for me. The family dynamics change a lot when someone dies. So how did that shift? I think I just did two questions there.
Yeah, it definitely did shift, because she was, I think, the person who brought everyone together. She was that person that kind of like invited us over, and like, well, actually, I was still living with my mom and dad at the time, but in terms of my sisters, she was kind of the person that was the glue, I think. And so when, she was no longer there, it was sort of hard to make that happen again, and to continue that kind of family get-togethers. And then my dad, remarried a couple of, like, not that long, couple of years after my mom died. So that was also a big change in our family dynamics. But now I think with my sisters especially, like, when we message each other when it's an anniversary or birthday of our mum, or one of us might find photos that we see and we send it to each other. Or yesterday, actually, no, the other day, yeah, this week, my sister found a video that I think we had put together for her funeral, like a collage of just a montage. Yeah, it's a collection of photos, and she, for some reason, found it on her phone somewhere, and she sent it to me and to my family, and like even in Sweden, nephews and nieces, and she just said, look what I found, and so so we kind of just, uh, and I think she's already within us, like we are just by the people that we are. We always sort of have mom as part of our lives, but now it's sort of a more casual kind of like, yeah, look what I found, or does
Yeah.
anyone remember where this bracelet of mom is? Does anyone have this ring? Or like, and we sort of share. We kind of, when it happened and we were going through her stuff, we were pretty good about it. Like we sort of just split things up, and we're not kind of, there wasn't any.
Especially because there's several all
Yeah.
girls. You're like, "No, no, no. That yellow looks good on me, so I'm keeping the yellow." So
Yeah, which I know can happen. There are some, I think, family feuds that come out of going through items. But I was lucky because none of my sisters wear scarves, or they're not really into scarves. So I was like, cool, and they were happy for me to take the scarves, and I wear them, in winter. So I was like, yes. Yeah. So now it's just more of a casual, and my dad, even though he is remarried, and he still has the portrait of my mom in the house,
Mm,
and he's like, that's not going anywhere, like
that's so good.
sometimes my one of my sisters will go, can I have that photo? And he's like, nah, it's staying here.
Yeah, but that's important too for you as daughters, right?
Mm,
As you seeing that it's not that all of a sudden, oh, poof, no, she's still part of
yeah.
your dad's life, even if there's somebody else that is
Mm,
now there too. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's not part of it. So that's beautiful that he has a picture
yeah.
of her as well at home.
Mm.
Gabriela, is there anything I have not asked you that you want to make sure that you share with the audience?
I guess I want people to know that sometimes it takes a bit of time to process things, and if you are in your first a few months or weeks or years, sometimes like it's not, you're not doing it wrong, or you're not kind of failing if you're not already, if you haven't started a non-for-profit organization, or if you
Mm,
haven't started a podcast. Like you don't need to work on other people's timelines, and you don't also need to make something out of the grief. It's I think, you know, for me, it took me years, and I think people, I don't, maybe I should share that more, because people see me now and think, oh wow, like she's doing so well. She's dealt with the grief, and she's doing things to help other people, but it didn't happen overnight, and it takes time, and it took years of feeling lost and numb and down to actually begin to process and come out of that bubble. So I think just hope that you might be, feeling like there's no end to the pain, and there's no way out, but nothing stays the same, and that includes like how you feel. I think that's something that I want people to know, that even if, yeah, you feel like you should have processed it by now, it's everyone has takes their own time, and everyone has their own process. So just trust that you'll you will feel better at some point, and the grief will still be there, but you'll learn how to live with it.
mhm, mm. Oh, that's so good because yes, a lot of times that part that you said about you don't have to necessarily feel that you have to do something with it because
Mm,
there's the things that we compare each other at times in grief. In life in general, we compare. Oh, people go on Instagram or Facebook. Oh, how
Mm,
come she's got, oh, how can she have a full face of had a face of makeup already? It's only 5 a.m. and she's already all put together. I barely roll myself out of bed and make myself, or whatever. And then in grief, we compare the way we grieve. We compare then also then the results at times as well. Like, wow, I can't believe this person's already doing that. I have
mm,
yet to even go through my mom's things yet, or I have
yeah.
yet to do XYZ. Yes, no, that is not beneficial to you to do that, first of all, to any of us to compare each other.
Mm,
And yes, you're right. Not everybody is going to express their grief in the same way. I may not write a song like you do. That is not my outlet. I have a
mm,
podcast. That was a way that I did. Other people, it will be in a personal way. The world may never know that they are grieving. They may just impact other people's lives
mm.
differently. So yes, do not feel that you have to do something
Yes.
to carry on the legacy of that person.
Mm,
Gabriela, it has been an honor to chat with you. And how can people get a hold of you? I know I'll put all the links of your website on the show
mm.
notes, but if you want to share a little more of how people can connect with you, with the Grief Cocoon, and just the work you do.
Yeah, sure. So we have a Instagram page. We're on Facebook and TikTok, just at the Grief Cocoon. And if people want to be part of the Grief Cocoon community as well, they can just download the Grief Cocoon from their app store. And there's a whole lot of resources and links on that as well. And yeah, I'll share my email as well if people want to connect that way. There's the website, thegriefcocoon.com. And yeah, I'm happy to connect anyway. You could send me a message online, or yeah, just connect through the community. And
The app, how do people do the app? Like, is that also on your website? The app that you mentioned, the community app?
yes, there is a link to it on the website. But if they just look up the Grief Cocoon on whether it's the App Store or Google Play, they'll find it there as well. Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
Well, thank you,
Thanks so much.
Gabriella. Oh, my honor to have you. And I'm glad we were able to find a time that was not 3 a.m. for you.
Me too. I think I'm much more awake now.
And thank you. Well, have an amazing day. And thanks again for sharing your story and your mom. What was your mom's name? What is your mom's
Oh,
name?
my mom's name was Samira.
Samira. And thanks for sharing Samira with us through you. So thank you.
Thanks, Kendra. It's been a lovely conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. When we read a novel and we know that it's fiction, yet we can relate to certain aspects of the characters' lives, it it can help us in our own journey in a way that it's kind of like when you hear music, right? It has it touches a different chord than sometimes when you're reading a memoir. Because with a memoir, you know for sure those things happen and or facts and you can still
Mhm.
relate, but they hurt you differently than in a novel. So in a novel is like this subtle way of being able to touch on topics that are hard in the characters' lives, but then within ourselves in order to reflect and yeah, and just have perspective of our own lives. So I think you've done that beautifully. A lot of different topics touched in both your books that will give the listeners who will be the readers, who give the readers of your novel a lot of insight about their own life. So thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that with us and sharing aspects about your own life. We tried not to give it away, but basically it's a love story, but it's a love story. It's a what other it wouldn't be this one's not coming of age type story. The other one would have been this one. What other topics would it fit into? Love story,
Well,
grief journey,
yeah, it's a
relationship.
love story. Yeah, and it's just about, the power of love to overcome anything, and
Yeah.
not in a sweetie pie way. It's life's hard, but I hope this book I just think there's some beautiful moments of relationship in here that, the value of staying the course and waiting to get past the 75% mark. It's the power of story to give us courage to move forward in our own journeys.
Thank you so
Thank you for
much.
having me.
I am grateful you were on, and people can find you on your website, and that is CherylOstrom.com. And we look forward to seeing, how people feel about when they read the book too. So feel free to reach out to Cheryl once you've read the book, or reach out to me and give us your insights. Thank you once again, Cheryl, for sharing your own life and Celia and Burnaby's life as well on this podcast.
My pleasure. Good to see you again.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.